People have been harvesting wild oysters here for generations, but oyster numbers have dropped to less than 1% of what they were when the colonists arrived. The problem is how to preserve local resources while promoting a wild harvest and public use of the Chesapeake Bay watershed.
What we do in environmental economics is create a framework for evaluating all the ways that people benefit from natural resources. And we try to compare that on a level playing field so that we can essentially create a decision support tool for how to make these tough trade-offs.
When the colonists arrived in St. Mary's City and pulled into the Potomac, the oyster reefs were extensive, and they were so big that they came out of the water at low tide. And as a consequence, they called them rocks because they looked like rocks and they were a navigational hazard.
Oysters are a big part of the local culture.
Well, this is the Oyster Festival. It's the start of the oyster season here in Maryland.
All right here!
Well, we love the oyster tacos.
My favorite way is steamed. I love steamed oysters, yes.
Oyster farming makes oysters available all year long.
We're here at the St. Mary's County Oyster Festival. We're in the tasting tent. This is Double T Oyster Ranch. We're on the lower Potomac River out of Herring Creek.
Charbroiled, fried, grilled, scalded, po' boys, shooters, stew, and tacos. Okay?
That's your favorite.
That's my favorite.
The oyster shucking champion represents the USA in Galway, Ireland. Oysters are harvested simply by pulling them out of the water.
But you can make a living at it, but it's not like it was years ago, you know. It's on a downhill slide. The Department of Resources is trying, and the water committees of the county are trying to get it to come back, but it's just one of them things, you know. Some things just wither away.
Well, we're up in Tongan all my life.
This is my dad's place. He's been down here for about 40 years now, Golden Eye Seafood. He started when he was probably about 14 years old working on the water. I'm a fourth generation waterman, and I learned a lot from him, and he learned a lot from his grandfather, who got him into it. And well, right now this boat right here is set up for diving, and they work right out here in the St. Mary's River and some of the tributaries off the Potomac, and they do pretty good. I dive myself too, but I'm not right now, but I have before in the past.
I've been a waterman for about 60 plus years. I'm 76. I've clammed, crabbed, oystered, hauled seine, done a little bit of everything that you can do in the water business. So we followed the river for at least 60 years.
Commercial harvesting is highly regulated, which reduces watermen's earnings.
Water business is a very varied, complex operation, whether it's crabbing, oystering, aquaculture. Look, forms of income for water people now, for the most part, unless a waterman has got his wife or somebody else in the family providing income, very few watermen could make a go of it, just on that alone.
Oystering for my family is probably one of the earliest things that we did behind charter fishing. So I guess we probably started in like 2003, 2004. I did. My husband had been oystering a lot longer than that. I guess you could say I was a kid when I started on the fishing boats, but not really once my husband introduced me to the oyster fishery. So I was probably in my early years of college before I really got into the oyster fishery.
I will probably go back oystering in the wild again this year. And that's just going to be nippering around the edge of the shore in November and December when the water cools up and the water gets clear enough for me to be able to see.
About 8 years.
How did you get into it?
My husband.
So already was a waterman and ended up
That's where drug me on here.
And you have kids?
We do. I do not think that they will ever want to do this, and I really wouldn't ever want them to do this because it's hard. We clam in the summer.
How does that work? You're in a suit, and how do you warm up in there?
I have hot water that pumps down from the top side from my boat, and it comes down, and my suit has tubes that go to my arms, to my hands, and down my legs to my feet, and holes poked in it, little holes about every 4 inches, and it just seeps hot water all around me all day long to keep me warm. Yeah, I dredged and patent tongued before that, and then I started diving, and I fell in love with that.
My daughter, she comes on the boat and helps out. She's worked the dive hoses for me when I've been oyster diving before, and she'll come out of the cabin, but you know, it really isn't for the faint of heart working for to catch oysters in the wintertime. My daughter's 10 now.
Well, the wild industry is from October to March, and when October comes in, you can catch them patent tonging, which is the hydraulic tongs that go down and catch them, or you can catch them diving in Maryland. Some people dive for them, and then you can catch them with hand tongs, and that's the old style way. A lot of people still do it though, because in certain areas that's all you can do.
Well, you know, things have advanced to such a state now that you almost need a laptop to take with you in the river to find out whether you're legal or not.
Can sanctuaries play a role in preserving a wild harvest? Some watermen feel strangled by the regulations associated with sanctuaries.
You're constantly fighting new regulations and organizations like the CCA and different groups it's so many groups out there that are against us, and we're so small numbered, our voice is very small, you know, and it's just a constant battle with that. And I don't know what the future might hold, you know. It's a gamble to get into this industry right now, and that's why you see a lot more people going out than you see coming in.
Well, they're going to die out and they're going to be gone. No young people's getting into it now. And the ones that are in the water business has got to have a wife or somebody else in the family providing a certain amount of income, because you can't just go crabbing and go oystering full time, because everybody likes to eat.
The state took Wednesdays, I heard, from us this year, so doesn't like me going into somebody's job, said you can't work Wednesday and you're not going to get paid for it. So they Saturdays, they slack Saturdays up on us too. He'll go. Now they're going to take Wednesdays. I don't know where they're going to. They slack the number of bushel that we get. And it was 12 bushel. They slacked it 10 bushel for drudging and hand tonging. It was 15. They slacked back to 12. So
if you're off on Wednesday, the wind blows Monday or Tuesday or Thursday or Friday, that's 2 days out of the week you're gone. You lost 2 days worth of work.
Well, you know, I went to college on a scholarship for a science project that I had done on the bay. And it's always kind of been a love of mine to be on the water, but I also know that I wanted that stability that comes with having a land job. So I really found the best of both worlds when I was able to start teaching and working on the water. The industry's changed a lot since we entered it. There's been the establishment of the statewide oyster sanctuary network, and we've seen a lot of regulations. I think the biggest thing is probably the public opinion of the oyster fishery, the wild oyster fishery.
But oysters provide another important function.
In the field of ecology, we have a whole group of organisms that we call ecosystem engineers, because they create processes that have feedbacks between their environment, and their own living resource. So they have these strong interactions with their environment, and for an oyster, the way that we've largely thought about that is the impact on water quality. So oysters filter particles out of the water column, and they filter a lot of different types of particles. They filter the particles that are phytoplankton, so the tiny microscopic algae that are their main source of food, but they also filter some suspended sediments. And the structure of an oyster reef can actually impact the particles in the water column by causing settling.
The oysters self-cleanse. I mean, their activity of feeding will clean the water of nutrients, and which is really, really important. And so without the oyster, the ecosystem doesn't do very well.
Do sanctuaries create their own problems?
The establishment by DNR of sanctuaries in Maryland waters was quite important, because the sanctuaries, of course, are they're supposed to be non-harvest areas.
Yes, it creates a problem when they take 25% of the good oyster bars and make them into sanctuaries. It affects your livelihood. It closes the circle of places that you can work all the time. For the likes of me, I really don't know the rationale of taking as much of St. Mary's River as they took from Church Point all the way up the head of that river.
The watermen have been working with the state, and we are actually making some good ground with the Department of Natural Resources. They are willing to work with us. And the way the watermen look at the sanctuary is we have such a good resource there that Mother Nature provides us, with seed, natural seed. And what we were proposing to the department was to use areas of that sanctuary to plant with shells, bare shells, and allow Mother Nature natural strike to strike on those shells, and to use it as pretty much a seeding area, and then plant those shells in different areas, different bars,
And I can't speak to the St. Mary's River in particular, because typically what limits natural oyster growth is the presence of hard bottom. So the larvae are out there swimming around looking for a nice hard place to settle. If they find it, great. And the more sanctuaries we have, the more larvae is out there looking for the right place to settle. But it really depends on whether there is the potential to settle, whether or not you get this spillover effect from the sanctuaries.
Overharvest has been a really big problem, and it isn't the general public that's overharvesting. We know who overharvested. So, we need to really take care of the resource. And to take care of the resource means that there needs to be protection. I mean, there's a reason why we have wildlife sanctuaries in general. For waterfowl, for fish, for animals of all sorts. And there aren't hunting's not allowed in wildlife sanctuaries that I know of. And we need to kind of adopt that mode of thinking in order to protect the resource and enhance it into the future. If we don't, then it's going to be gone. I mean, the oyster industry started in New York and then moved south, and had to move south because the oysters were completely depleted in those areas. And so, I mean, there aren't any. So we have a chance in the Chesapeake Bay to reverse what we've been doing. And I'd like to see us have the courage to protect the resource the way we ought to.
Early in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic affected the distribution of local oysters. Here's a text from Captain Lumpkins. We have been catching some oysters off of our private bottom. Fresh seafood is actually in pretty good demand, especially retail carryout. Wholesale orders have been down some due to some places being closed, but we've been making out okay. A dialogue between watermen, activists, and scientists is essential. All parties working together can preserve a traditional way of life and Maryland's wild oyster harvest.